You want to stretch the truth.
Yes, when you're writing like a story, maybe it's asking you to write a story about a time that your room got really messy, or a story about something. Then you can make it funny. You can exaggerate certain details and stretch the truth. However, if they're asking you to say write about why uniforms should or should not, a more serious topic, that might not be such a good time. But yes, when it's a narrative topic, when it's like a story and you're supposed to be funny, then definitely that can be an excellent way to do it. What else?
Kimberly?
Add lots of details.
Add lots of details. Very good. Think about if you're someone who's reading essays, who's reading stories, then would you want it to be fun? Would you want it to be interesting? You probably would. What else? Let's get one more thing.
Writing complete sentences.
Writing complete sentences. Always a good thing to do. And definitely it's a good idea. It's kind of like when you're doing math and you want to check to make sure that you did your math right. It's also a little bit like that in writing. You want to go over it quickly, make sure you didn't make any spelling or grammar mistakes, because those can be worth a lot of points. And then from a rubric is something that is used to grade writing. Then you want to use language effectively by exhibiting word choices that are engaging and appropriate for intended audience and purpose. What does that mean? It's kind of complicated. So the use language effectively part of it. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Write stuff that's appropriate.
Write stuff that's appropriate. Yes, very good. Basically what it's saying is use the words that make it interesting, engaging, and appropriate. So use words that are right for what you're writing about, that are interesting for intended audience and purpose, whoever's going to be reading your work. So, for instance, as we talked about, if you're talking about your mom to an audience that doesn't know your mom, you would want to explain your mom. That's a little bit of what this is about, that's appropriate for the intended audience and purpose. And then using language effectively is about using good word choice, using specific words, things like that. Write for your audience, explain who or what you're talking about, define key terms or explain key terms. So you might say the BMX racing bike. For dinner we ate Milanese, the Mexican version of chicken fried steak, because the average reader might not know what Milanese or BMX is. So just in case, you might want to explain it. And tip number 4 is make a point. Make a point that you support and you're able to explain. Interesting writing often makes a point, and in order to create powerful writing from a prompt, you need to turn your topic into a point or main idea. So, for instance, if your topic is write about a pet, which you think, or write about what kind of animal you think makes the best pet, then you would take a topic, so pets, you would refine that. Maybe you think squirrels make the best pet. Flying squirrels make great pets, and then your topic sentence would be something like flying squirrels make great pets because they are intelligent and entertaining. So you support it with reasons. And actually, this is an example of a prompt which does that. It has a topic sentence and also supports it with details very similar to the one about the role model that we looked at earlier. And then tip number 5 is making sure that your writing answers the who, what, when, how, or why of the prompt topic. I had the W's a little bit out of order. For instance, if you have something like write about a time when you were brave, how were you brave? That's when, how. You might also explain who, yourself. So going into detail and answering all those questions, and then of course reread, revise, and proofread your prompt response to catch mistakes. These are just a few of the tips and they don't really take much time at all. It's just looking at the prompt, reading it carefully, responding, making sure that you don't have errors, using good word choice. These are things which might sound sort of like off in the back of your head, but they're very easy to do when you're actually writing it out and responding to a prompt. So if you look at these, they look pretty fun, but these actually got much lower scores. These are examples of more prompt responses. They got much lower scores because there were several spelling errors. In the end, I'm hoping that when you look at a prompt, you can turn your face from this to something more like this. Let's quickly review what we just talked about. When you look at a prompt, what are some of the first things you want to do?
Isaac? Think about what you're gonna write about.
Think about what you're going to write about. Very good. You might brainstorm some ideas. What else?
Abigail?
You could try to get ideas in your mind about your topic.
Get ideas in your mind about the topic. Stay on topic. Yes. What else?
No.
Make an outline.
I'm sorry?
Make an outline.
Make an outline. Very good. You might have some kind of pre-writing. You might write down your ideas. You might make an idea map. You might make an outline. Very good. What else?
Alexa?
Use certain details on according to your audience.
Think about details according to your audience. Yes. What does your audience need to know? What else?
Michaela?
Think how you can make the story interesting to your audience.
Think about how you can make the story interesting to your audience. What can you use to draw them in? Great. And one more thing.
Jacob?
What's the purpose in writing it?
What is the purpose in writing it? Excellent. So when you are first looking at a prompt, we definitely think about your purpose. So what am I trying to do? Am I trying to convince someone to think that what I think is right? Think about your purpose. Think about your audience. Who is going to be reading your work? What do they need to know? How much do you need to explain? Sorry for that handwriting here, and then also think about your perspective. What do I think? What's my point of view on a topic? So, important things to consider. What's my purpose? Who's my audience? What is my perspective? Okay, so I think that we've covered quite a lot about writing from prompts. Hopefully you have a better idea of how your response might look like. And now I can take any questions that you might have. If you want to ask me any questions, you can go ahead.
Anybody have any questions? What grade? Taylor?
Was it hard to get your books published?
I'm sorry?
Was it hard to get your books published?
Was it hard to get my books published? It was a little bit because I printed out my manuscript and I wrote quite a few stories. So it would be a very large manuscript, very big, and we'd send it through the mail to all these publishers, and of course I'd get rejection letters one after another. But because I was 7, a lot of times when you're pretty young, when you're 6 or 7, then you're like, I can do anything. I can do a lot of stuff. So I still kept on sending my manuscript. I would call up the publishers, and some very large publishers were like, well, we don't publish books by children. And so then I found a publisher called Action Publishing, and I had been looking at pretty much all the publishers in the world by now. And I called them up, and I was actually lucky enough to get the publisher on the phone. And so that was really a turning point. And they were really intrigued as far as the idea for publishing this book, Flying Fingers, of short stories by a 7-year-old. And so that was how it really took off.
Deshaun?
What grade are you in?
What grade am I in? I'm in 9th grade, but I actually skipped 2 grades. So, my district is kind of weird with 7th and 8th grade, or you can be kind of, it depends on how early you went to kindergarten, but yeah, I'm in 9th grade.
Okay.
When you make your books, do you have to do you sit on the computer and type first? Or do you have to think about it? How do you know when you want to write a book?
That's a great question. A lot of times what'll happen is I'll think of an idea at some point. A lot of times I'll get an idea before I'm about to go to bed, or maybe in the middle of the day, so I can get them at weird times. I'll just have an idea and I'll think, that's a pretty good idea, and I'll write it down. I have a folder full of all these ideas that I have for writing stories. And sometimes if it's a short story, I sometimes like to sit down and think about it, maybe write it out, especially if it's maybe 2 pages or 3 pages. It's fairly easy to write in one sitting. If it's a novel, I might plan it out a little more. So if it's going to be 100 pages rather than 10 pages, then I would probably think, here's my main character, here's the conflict, here's what's going to happen at the end, so that I don't kind of lose track while I'm writing. That's something that happens to me a lot when I'm writing longer stories. So generally, if it's a short story and I'm in a good time right then, I might even sit down and write it up. If it's a longer story, I'll probably write down the idea and plan it out at another time.
Great.
What is your first story about?
What is my first story about? Well, Flying Fingers, this is my first book right here. It's actually it's a book of short stories, so it has 9 short stories, and they're each a little bit more than 10 pages long. It really actually varies quite a bit, story to story. But and they have all these different characters. So 9 stories plus some of my poems and tips on writing. It's kind of a book about many different things.
Jacoby?
What kind of book do you write? I mean, like, what kind of book is like fiction?
What kinds of books do I write, or what kinds of books do I like?
What kind of books do you write? Like, are they fiction?
The genre.
Sure.
What genre?
So the types of books I write, I like to write a lot of fantasy and historical fiction. So you'll always find at least 1 or 2 stories that I'm writing about castles and kings and queens and stuff like that. But I also like to write I have some stories from like ancient Egypt and stuff like that in my book Flying Fingers. But I also have a story called Diary of a Preteen or Journal of a Preteen, and it's contemporary. It's from this character who lives in the present. So I like to write really stories from all across many different types of stories.
Alexa?
What's above the smartboard? I've been wondering what that is. Above the
Yeah.
smartboard.
That's a good question. This is actually it's called an active board. So yeah, very similar to a smart board, and it just works by a computer hookup over here. So I have my laptop, and then I have some stuff plugged in, and that powers the projector, and then a little cord also makes it so that when I move the mouse, when I move my pen on here, then it moves the mouse on the computer. So I could control when I was typing up on here, and so it's that's from the projector that you can see the computer, and it's from another cord that I can move the mouse. So fairly simple, but.
Logan?
Will you be making another book?
Well, I made another book. Yes, I definitely hope so. I'd love to have another book full of short stories and poems because I've been working on quite a lot since Dancing Fingers and Flying Fingers. That Dancing Fingers is a book of poems. I would also like to. I need to have the discipline in order to write a really long story, like a couple hundred pages or something. I have to sit myself down every day and be really committed to it. So I think that takes a lot of discipline, and I would like to do that. I think it would be good to write a novel. So yes, and then another project I'm also looking at, I would love to write a book about writing, especially for kids, especially for students like you. So yeah, there's a few different projects I'm thinking about.
Larry?
When your newest books come out, can you send some to him and you start opening start with the written and see how they are?
I'll definitely let you guys know. I'll be like, hey, I published some new books. Yeah.
Hi.
Like, do you go to libraries and give like book autographs and give us like people give you their books and do you like sign them with your autograph or something?
I'm sorry?
Are you
Like,
asking?
do you have book signings?
Do I have book signings? Yes, I have had a few book signings. I don't do them like regularly. I mean, it's been I don't go on huge book tours generally, but I often when I go to conferences or when I speak someplace, there will be people can buy books and I can sign them for them. I've done it also at some bookstores. So yeah, I have done book signings before. And
Okay, last question. Oh, Ashley.
What state do you live in?
What state do I live in? I live in Redmond, Washington State, and do any of you know where Seattle is?
Yes.
Seattle, yeah, great. So Redmond is very close to Seattle, and it rains quite a lot here. And actually, I think it's pretty nasty out right now. But otherwise, it's a pretty nice place. And does the teacher have any questions?
No.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have worked really hard, and I really appreciate your participation. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.